I object. I object.
Okay, we are going to call this meeting to order for our work session to deal with some of the health insurance issues of the district. And we will move right into 1.02 with the Pledge of Allegiance. So even before we do the adoption of the agenda, just to the all of the board members and anybody who is watching on YouTube or may watch a little bit later, because it's public information and Dr. Buck and I wanted to make sure that everybody heard it, we do have the vaccine schedule for staff. And it's an exciting day that we got it, that staff was able to get this figured out. So kudos to the Jackson County Health Department, Truman Medical Center, and staff here within our district. So if I know staff has received that communication already, and so on March 20th and March 25th, we'll be doing the first dose for nearly 1,000 people, and then on April the 10th and April the 15th, we'll be doing second doses. And for parents out there, we did also say that we will be having some AMIX days, so some asynchronous learning days there on March the 25th and then April 15th and 16th. So it's an exciting time. Exciting is maybe not the right word. It's relief to be able to finally get everything scheduled. So I am very, very happy for staff that we were able to get this done. And for those of you who don't know, we were also able to incorporate another school and another school district into this as well. So kudos to all of the staff who worked on that. So thank you very much. Dr. Buck, did I miss anything on that? Okay. 1.03 is the adoption of the agenda tonight, so I would take a motion on that, please.
I move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for the adoption of the agenda tonight. Is there any comments or questions? All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye.
Dr. Hedrick?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the motion carries unanimously, and we'll move on to 2.01. This is where we are going to have a discussion over the health insurance RFP and the criteria, and a lot that's been going on within the committee. So do you want me to turn it over to you, or just go ahead and turn it over? We'll go and turn it over to Sarah McMillan.
All right, thank you and good evening. As you all are aware, our medical plan for 2022 is due for an RFP. State statute and board policy does require for our insurance to be bid every 3 years. So tonight we really want to highlight the work of the team, the education sessions that we've had over the past few months, and then share with you the team's recommendations for the RFP. So here are the topics we plan on covering this evening. We know that there will be questions, so we will save as much time as possible for all of us to have a discussion. So what we did, we created a small subset of the insurance team to be a part of our education sessions, really for the purpose of building an understanding of all the moving parts of a medical plan, the various funding options that are available, and then analyzing those funding options for the opportunities and the risks that each option has. Another purpose was to determine the medical plan funding options to include in the district's RFP, and really to narrow the funding recommendations as much as possible, because the bids from the carriers will be more competitive when the fewer the funding options there are for them to bid on. And then really the last purpose was to prepare our team members to participate in the RFP process. During our sessions, we did break into smaller discussion groups, which really helped facilitate discussion among the team members. All of our team members participated, they were engaged, and I would really like to thank them for the time they've invested in this process so far. All right, so for your reference, the district's current medical plan funding is a cost plus or a hybrid model. So during our first session, CBIZ did an excellent job of really laying the foundation for us. We took a very deep dive into understanding the components of the health plan, understanding how all of the varying funding options work. And then we also reviewed at that point, again, the opportunities and risks associated with each funding type. During that first meeting as well, we did spend quite a bit of time discussing these design and funding considerations. Not going to go through all of those with you. You received the presentation earlier. All right, so our second session really focused strictly on self-funding. Self-funding not only on our own, self-funding in a consortium as well. So Dr. Buck during that meeting did share his experiences that he's had with consortiums. And from this session, the team suggested we send questions to school district in Missouri consortiums to gather feedback from them because each consortium is so different. So CBIZ did that on behalf of the district. They sent that to 7 consortiums. So during our third session, again, we reviewed additional components of a self-insured plan. We also reviewed the survey responses from 3 consortiums that we received back. The team then discussed which components of self-funding we may or may not want to include in the RFP. So during our last session, we went over the actual content of the RFP and then the in-depth analysis that CBIZ will do for us once we receive all of those responses, and they'll provide that back to our team. And at that meeting, we really did spend a lot of time, once again, discussing the opportunities and the risks associated with each funding plan. And then during this last meeting, the team did develop our RFP recommendations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron Eason from CBIZ and Dr. Miller, and they're going to share with you our team's recommendations.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks to all of you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk through what we discussed, and it really was a collaborative approach. I was really impressed with the engagement of the group, and insurance is not the most exciting topic, so the level of engagement and the level of learning was just, I was really impressed with. So I want to we broke this into the same categories that Sarah showed in that first graphic, and I'm just going to do a brief overview of what each funding type is, the opportunities at a very high level that exist within that funding type, the risks, and then Dr. Miller is going to focus on the team's kind of collaborative recommendations. So the first that I'll reference is a traditional fully insured model. If you think about the closest thing that makes sense to me is if you think about car insurance and how that works. You know that every month or every 6 months you pay X dollars. If you get into an accident, they cover, aside from a deductible, they cover your premium. That's what this is. It's fixed cost. And that's really the key opportunity that exists in a traditional fully insured model, is that it is a fixed cost that you can budget for over time. The risks, with the district size, your large district, that's going to be typically a much more costly premium. So it just usually is going to come out to be one of the more expensive types of coverage. There's less ability to adjust your prospective funding level with a set premium that way. So you're kind of at the mercy of how the carrier is projecting trend, and so it's not always a direct correlation to your actual experience. Oftentimes in this type of model, there is less flexibility with plan design, so you're given options to choose from. Now, that's not to say that there isn't flexibility, but it's typically more set for you. If you don't spend claim dollars, so you fund at a certain level and your claims don't hit that level, the insurance carrier, that's their benefit. They're taking on all the risk. They take the unspent claims dollars. There is a need to front load your reserve, and that's built into the premium. That's you're kind of driving up so that the insurance company has the ability to pay out your claims. Your carrier is the one determining your pooling level, so you don't get to say, you're not defining levers. The carrier is defining those, and then that drives the premium. And then the last is that if you were to make a decision to move, and this is going to be consistent with really almost any potential solution outside of your current solution, you would have to pay out any run-out costs out of your reserves for claims. So that really goes for anything that's not unique to fully insured.
And really, the team came to quick consensus on fully insured that we did not feel like this is a path that we wanted to walk down. We felt like this would be taking a step backward from where we currently are in our current model. So again, not really any benefit. We thought we actually ran a greater risk of higher premiums. So again, something that the team did not want to pursue.
All right, the next model that we evaluated is a hybrid model, and as Sarah mentioned initially, that is where you sit currently. So a hybrid model from a technical standpoint is still a fully insured model. However, and there is a fixed premium that's set annually. However, there is some risk sharing allowed or applied to the employer in the case of these models. So in your current cost plus Blue KC model, that risk sharing is unspent claims dollars come back. It's a 1-to-1. In others, they're often called participating, or there might be a rebate. It could be a different algorithm set, but based upon your actual experience, you may get some or a percentage of your premium back. In the current arrangement and even in other hybrid arrangements, the risk corridor, and what I'm referring to with that risk corridor is it's in the context of, you might think of stop loss as well. That risk corridor is your expected claims to the maximum claims you could pay based on how your stop loss or your reinsurance. That risk corridor in a hybrid model and in your current model is 5%. So I expect I'm going to pay $100. I have a 5% leeway. I could pay up to $105, and then anything above that, the carrier takes on or the stop loss takes on. So that's a 5% corridor. That's going to be a contrast to when we talk about self-funding here in a second. So, that is a smaller risk corridor specifically. You have input on how you want to fund. You can fund to expected. You can fund to maximum, which is how you funded last year. You can fund anywhere in between that, but you control that funding and how, your minimum is funding to expected. Blue KC actually, in your current arrangement, they actually fund any claims that come in initially. And they immediately fund those claims so that they're not accruing from an ongoing process over time. Your unspent claims dollars come back to you, so it's a direct 1-to-1. And then your reserve, so anything not spent is held by the district. You can continue to accrue interest on that until you have to pay out your claims amount. So you're getting billed on a monthly basis to pay out. And included in most hybrid contracts is some amount of rebating for pharmacy. Some amount. That's an important difference in the stop loss, or in the self-funded space. Risks, premium may be more costly than under other funding mechanisms. The carrier is taking on more risk, and so it becomes more costly in that regard. And there are a limited number of arrangements out there. It's not as prolific, though most of the large carriers have some sort of arrangement that aligns to a hybrid model.
And so again, the team came quickly to consensus on this as well regarding hybrid. So we have assumed a greater risk, that 5% corridor that Aaron talked about. We're familiar with that. And we've benefited from that in positive years like the year we've just recently had. We don't benefit from it in, the 2 previous years. But it adds to our reserves. And so again, team came to consensus that this is something that we should be included in the RFP. But we also want to be very clear that we also should be looking for other carriers that have similar programs.
The next one that I want to talk about is a consortium. So this is a group of organizations, often similar by industry. So we talked about school district consortiums that come together with a goal of increasing purchasing power and spreading risk or minimizing singular risk onto a specific employer. They vary widely. So consortiums are unique entities in of themselves, and so you really have to evaluate each one kind of independently of the other to determine how much or how little risk is involved. The opportunity is that, though. It is spreading risk. It's the ability to come together, form a larger group, increase purchasing power. They often also have access to a lot of other solutions that maybe independently an organization wouldn't have the appetite to invest in or the ability to invest in, but by, again, coming together as a larger group, have access to those. From a risk standpoint, and these are just risks that occur with some consortiums, not all consortiums, because they vary. But you may not be offered access to a particular consortium. It isn't always an open door policy. They want to make sure if they're bringing an organization in that you're going to bring the right kind of risk to them. So they may or may not include you. And in fact, in prior years, we were not given an option to even, they didn't opt to bid on an RFP in prior years, some consortiums. There may be less flexibility with plan design, similar to a fully insured model. They may really want to prescribe what your options are and eliminate options that don't align to the goals of the consortium. Depending on the structure of the consortium, your renewal may be influenced by the performance of the overall fund. So it's kind of the idea of being rated independently or rated as the entire group. And sometimes one or the other is better for you, but that can depend on how the consortium is structured. A higher than expected losses may require an off-anniversary increase. So this is kind of, it has happened, it's unusual, but if you are in a consortium and the consortium has collected X dollars in premium and the claims at a certain period of time in the plan year exceed what's in their reserves, and they need to be able to fund to that, they might come to the members of the consortium off anniversary, so off budgetary cycle, and try to collect dollars. It's unusual for that to happen, but it's not unheard of. There's often a multi-year commitment period associated with consortiums. They want to have a guaranteed amount of time that you're in the risk pool in order to get the consistency and really get that purchasing power. But because of that, you often can get into an off-cycle situation where exiting the consortium, if it doesn't end up being in your best interest, it can be challenging. And so it's just something to consider and would be part of, included in the RFP requirements. And then similar to the fully insured model, the district would, of course, have to pay run-out claims from your cost-plus plan.
So the team did spend quite a bit of time talking about consortiums. And ultimately, we landed on recommending that it be included in the RFP for a couple of reasons. One, strength in numbers, the ability to mitigate some risk and share that across multiple districts. We think that would be a benefit. But we also talked at length about making sure that the RFP is structured so that we're asking questions that will protect LSR7's interests, right? So we know that we've got 4,000 members, and we want to make sure that if we're the largest entity going into the consortium, what does that mean for us, and how are we protected? You know, Aaron brings up a good point. You know, if we get into a consortium situation, what does that mean if we have to exit? So, you know, being thoughtful about moving, you know, looking down the road.
The last one is where we spent also a considerable amount of time, and this is in self-funding. So in a self-funded arrangement, you pay fixed monthly costs to an administrator. You might hear TPA, third-party administrator. Sometimes that could be a company that just does that. Sometimes it's actually a carrier. You'll hear about like United Healthcare as a self-funded administrator. But if you're paying a fixed amount for them to administer claims and provide you access to a network of providers. That amount is a set fixed amount that's set annually, and it typically doesn't vary substantially because it's just the activity of processing and managing claims. And then you pay for claims as they're incurred. So no matter what, there's obviously a level of variability in that amount, in that process, and you're funding those as they're incurred. So, you know, your check comes at the first check comes at the end of the month, and you're funding those claims. You can have all the things that you need bundled. Often that's referred to as ASO. It's not an exact equal definition, but often you'll hear that. So, but a bundled approach is when your medical, your pharmacy, your stop loss, your administration is all bundled together and administered by the same carrier provider. That's a bundled approach. There's also the ability to carve out, and the two most common things that can be carved out are pharmacy and stop loss. Stop loss, again, is your reinsurance, it's your risk. If a particular claim hits a certain amount, the stop loss kicks in and covers above that amount. If your total claims for the year hit a certain amount, your stop loss, that's the aggregate, your stop loss kicks in. So those can be carved out and marketed independently, and sometimes you can get to a better financial service or a better, just from a actual services perspective, by unbundling. The thing, and you'll remember from the hybrid conversation, we talked about a 5% corridor between expected and maximum in a self-funded, whether you carve out or you're carved in. This is regardless. Stop loss is typically, the corridor is typically between 20 and 25%. So that's a substantial increase in risk, okay, that you take on. It is, from an opportunity standpoint, it is the most flexible arrangement. You have the ability to tack on, bolt on different solutions that can help manage specific costs, specific challenges. It works somewhat similarly into your current arrangement in that unspent claims dollars stay with you. You kind of get away from the idea of a renewal. You're paying the claims. So the carrier isn't taking on risk with the exception of the stop loss. It's you taking on most of the risk. I mentioned the ability to carve out. The integrated, you do still integrate. There are sometimes offerings that don't integrate, but you still typically will look to integrate your pharmacy, your stop loss, and your medical together so that they function seamlessly. From an employee or a member perspective, they don't know the difference in somebody that's self-funded versus fully insured. It feels the same as long as that integration is in place. And that also mitigates a tremendous amount of work on the side of the benefit staff. And I mentioned the budget, the renewal is set based on actual claims utilization. The administration fees remain fairly flat. That's just managing, the claims that come through. This is the highest financial risk, highest variability in budget option. So again, you've got that larger risk corridor, and so that gives more exposure financially to the district. It also gives you, on the opportunity side, the most opportunity to have the benefit from a positive plan year. Your reserve requirements are often higher than where you are currently because the risk margin is higher. There's more that you potentially could spend out before you hit max, and so you have to have more in your reserves in order to handle that. Some stop loss contracts, again, carved in or out, will retain the right to laser particular claimants. So they'll see a claimant, this could happen, they could see a claimant that is consistently year over year costing the district a substantial amount of money. So let's say $1 million annual claimant, okay? And they might say, we will do all of your stop loss at this price, but we're gonna laser that claimant, meaning the district then has to pay out all of the cost of that claimant. So they'll retain that right to do that. So it's just something you have to know that they may do. Depending on the degree of unbundling that you do, so if you pull everything apart, that may require additional administrative work on the side of someone. So whether that's hiring an FTE, working with an administrator to fund an FTE, you just have to be aware that unbundling is just what it sounds like. It's a lot more moving pieces that work independently of one another, and you have to work to make sure they're integrated in order to deliver a seamless solution. It is common for the it's common for the aggregate protection to reimburse the policyholder at the end of the year, so they're not sort of as you hit your ag paying you back. They're waiting till the end and then paying you back at the end. So you might continue to have to fund. So that's, again, a reserve issue, making sure you have those reserves. And similar to the other one, you'd have to pay run-out claims. One other item that I'll just mention is that there is a unique component to self-funding with stop-loss, and that is that stop-loss carriers often, they will provide a preliminary renewal or preliminary proposal at around the same time you get your renewal today for medical, but they won't provide a final renewal to almost right before the end of the plan year. And you can just kind of imagine why that is. They are taking on risk and they want to make sure nothing comes in that's going to impact what they proposed. So what can happen is that they can come in at the end of the plan year and say, yeah, actually it's going to be X% higher or X% lower. That will have happened after your open enrollment period. So at that point, the employer, the district, would have to make the decision to kind of eat that cost and pay it out themselves, or go back to employees and say, your premium has changed to this amount. It could come in the other way, right? It could be lower, but that's not typically what you see happen. So it's a unique situation.
So this was another area where we spent quite a bit of time discussing. Again, I think when the team came together, this was probably the area that we had the most interest in because we saw the most potential. But I think the deeper we got into the discussion, we looked at the high level of risk. That 20 to 25% risk corridor is significant. And when you look at not just medical insurance and you look broader at the district's financial objectives, opening middle school number 4, some of our salary considerations, are we in the position really to be taking on that level of risk? And again, if we have a bad plan year, that will be on the district to make sure that we're taking care of that. So again, looking at our reserves, we're going to have to pay run-out claims. Are we really in the position to assume that risk moving forward? So again, after thoughtful discussion, the team landed on not recommending this to be a part of the RFP. Okay, one of the things that we wanted to provide you was just a brief overview of an industry standard. And you'll see 23 Missouri school districts. 3 of those that are listed are a part of a consortium. 6 of them are a part of cost plus funding. 2 are self-funded, and 12 are fully insured. And then you have Kansas schools. 7 total are provided. 2 are self-funded, 3 are cost plus, and 2 are fully insured. And our proposed timeline, just so you're aware, we're hoping to put the RFP out mid-March. Take April to really analyze and review responses, and take the month of May to really identify those finalists and bring them in for presentations with recommendation to the board in July. So that's really the timeline moving forward. And at this point, we're happy to entertain questions and have discussion.
Thank you for the proposal. As we go through this, we'll do the best. Feel free to jump in, I guess is what I'm saying to some board members. In case we're on a particular topic and we don't want to vary from that topic and you know, that kind of thing. So feel free to jump in as we go through this discussion and ask questions about this, because I'm sure you will have some. So just to kind of treat it more like a informal discussion here as we go through. So Board Member Fritchie.
Thank you. I know this is tough work. It's intense work. And I appreciate you guys exploring all the options, and I appreciate this smaller committee. My question is, at what point do we bring in the larger insurance committee that includes representatives from each of the schools and departments in the district?
We had actually had a meeting scheduled last week, but we felt it was important to get input from the board on the direction of the RFP, and then meet with our larger insurance committee following.
And I'll just add to that, really our plan is to kind of go through this same discussion with the entire team, bring them up to speed, and solicit their input as well.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Board Member Campbell.
I think, so I was a part of the committee, but I just want to clarify for folks watching and for my fellow board members. So on this smaller committee, we had 2 board members. We definitely had SLT participation. Did we have, can we go through kind of the committee membership?
Sure, I would be happy to do that.
Thank you.
I'll get back to that slide. So Dr. Buck was part of the team, Dr. Miller, Dr. Delsum, Steve Williams, our CFO, myself. Erin Jensen is one of my team members. She's the district's benefits specialist. Board President Murdoch, Board Member Campbell. Bob King is a custodian at Lee Summit North. And then Trish Oswald, she is a teacher. So all of those members are part of our insurance team.
Great, thank you for doing that. And then, again, regarding Board Member Fritchie's question around the broader committee, just want to highlight that's representation from every building in the district, right?
That is correct.
In
We have-
departments?
Right, exactly. We have about 45 members on our insurance team, so each building has a representative. Retirees have a representative. The 2 teacher groups have a representative. Then we have health services has a representative, BASS, different departments as well. So yeah, it's about a 45-member team.
Great, thanks. And do most of the people that work in those buildings know who their committee representation is, or how is that communicated?
Yes, we encourage them to, after our meetings, to share the information with their coworkers, with their building, with their organizations. So yes, typically they would be identified
Great,
to the
thank you.
building. You're welcome.
Other questions? Board Member Doan.
Do we talk to these other districts, especially the consortium, just to see their perspective on their insurance? Do we know how long they've been in the consortium?
We absolutely can and would have the opportunity to speak with different districts in this particular consortium as well as others. Blue Springs has been, Blue Springs and Smithville have both been in the consortium for many years. Blue Springs is one of the founding members. Fort Osage just went into the consortium this last plan year. You'll see Hickman Mills on this. They were in that consortium and have left. So there's absolutely the opportunity. We haven't done that at this point. And there are other consortiums that would be considered. I don't want this, there's not just a single one. So with the recommendation, the idea would be to elicit, hopefully, RFP responses from many consortiums so that we're getting an idea of what options exist. As I mentioned, they can be very different from consortium to consortium. So we want to make sure that we're not, viewing them as all the same.
So you may not know this then, can you just be in that consortium for the 3 years that we usually do?
So that's going to be one of the key areas that we intend to, assuming we move forward with this recommendation, we intend to have a focus section within the RFP that is consortium-only responses. And so in that, we would address specifically, here is the board policy for LSR7 with regards to purchasing. This is the renewal process. How would that, and we would be eliciting a response. How would, if the district after the first 3 years decided to move out, at what point would there need to be a notification? How would that work to make sure that it aligns to the requirements of the board and board policies? So,
Awesome. Thank you.
absolutely.
Board Member Campbell?
I know that as part of the conversation, I remember within the RFP talking about apples to apples and thinking about the things that we really appreciate in what we offer to the staff of LSR7, like one thing being the wellness center. So making sure that as part of the RFP, while that's not highlighted in these options, that as we develop the RFP, things that are important like that, we plan to ask questions and look into continuing. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, that's correct. And a couple of items in that, like right now, our Blue Cross gives us a well-being fund. Well, we use that well-being fund to fund the salary and benefits of our well-being coordinator, and then there's usually some funds left that we can use towards programming. So we want to ask all the carriers, can you provide that? So that's one thing that comes to mind when we're talking about that. And I don't know if Dr. Miller, Aaron, the additional items, Kathy, that we talked about, that we're going to make sure we include.
Well, you mentioned probably the biggest one with the Complete Health and Wellness Center. And, the question's going to be, A, will you integrate? How will you integrate? And, B, can it, is that a part of your model? Because just to be honest, there may be models that it doesn't integrate with. And so we need to know that needs to be part of the analysis. And, just like anything else, does it make sense to include or not include? The portal that Blue KC offers, they offer some programming as well currently. So what is included, in any other offering, price transparency tools, and really just kind of a catch-all to say what do you include that's kind of in that above and beyond. We talked about health innovations, and really what are offerings that you would bring with you to this potential response or potential partnership.
Thank you.
Board Member Allen?
Thank you. Last year, going through some of this conversation, there was some speculation as to moving toward a self-funded, plan, and obviously or recommendations not include that in this RFP. Was that just a talking point last year? Is it our experience is so poor that self-funding is really not on the table because of lack of reserves? Or I distinctly remember a former CFO talking about that. So I'm just curious.
No, you're absolutely right, Board Member Allen. And I think, like I said earlier in the presentation, we really entered this discussion kind of thinking that held the most possibility. And really, in a good plan year, it does. But again, how much risk do we want to assume, considering how volatile our budget has been this year? the objectives that we have coming up next year, opening middle school, looking at the full budget picture, how much risk do we want to take on? And I think that was part of the rationale for the recommendation to move away from that.
All right, that's fair. Just wanted to ask.
Board Member Fritchie?
Yes, I'm going to do a little bit of historical reference here. I think it was almost 3 years ago that we formed a committee, and I was on that committee to look at the possibility of consortium. And we heard a presentation from the consortium, I believe that Blue Springs is a part of. And at that time, I think they only had 2 or 3 school districts in that consortium. And I remember very vividly when we had that discussion, we did say that because of the size of Lee Summit and the number of employees we have, that we would be taking on the biggest risk in joining, if we decided to join that consortium. I guess my question now is, how strong is that consortium now? And would we, again, be the largest and in taking on the most risk?
And you are correct. I was part of that process too 3 years ago. That was the last RFP that the district did for medical insurance. There were 2 finalists. It was Blue Cross and then the consortium that's listed here. At that time, there were 5 school districts in this consortium. We, again, I think I've got my notes back there, 4 districts now. I think the lives are around a total, I'd have to look at my notes, 4,000. But we would definitely be the largest employer in that group. So we, as we mentioned earlier, there are a lot of consortiums in the state of Missouri. So that's why we are going to tailor that RFP. If we include consortiums in that, we will tailor it to answer those questions, because there could be disadvantages for being the largest employer in the group, and then how do they spread that risk? So that current, the consortium Blue Springs is in, they currently have 5,181 lives. So that includes employees, dependents, and as Dr. Miller said, we have about 4,000 lives on our medical plan now. So I don't know if that answers your questions.
Thank you very much.
I'll add, I think the committee was really interested in, we don't want to be a significant percent of a consortium if possible, is kind of what the gist of the committee coming up with the RFP, if I'm speaking correctly.
Absolutely, and I think the other piece of that is, and that really was the intention of the team's recommendation, to ensure that the questions vetted the risk, right? So if in your response we are a significant portion, what then are you doing to protect the risk of us as an organization? And and the answer may be, nothing. It may not be sufficient. They're not going to say nothing, but it may not be sufficient to protect the risk. But that's really how we're going to guide the response, particularly to ensure that we have confidence that any option considered puts the district in the, in the best financial opportunity. You're not going to eliminate any risks. That's the whole concept associated with a consortium. So I want to be clear. We're not trying to get ourselves into a fully insured risk kind of category at a consortium rate. We have to assume some risk, but we have to understand what that is very clearly. And certainly when you're the largest percentage of an organization or of a consortium, you do bring a substantial amount of the risk with you.
And I'm going to jump in because I have a question on that, so I apologize for kind of jumping ahead of those of you who have also buzzed in here. On the consortium level, and this perhaps might be getting a little bit too far ahead of ourselves, but, in a renewal concept, one of the things that you guys have mentioned, we've talked about it in these meetings, is we have a bad year. How does that impact our renewal versus the group having a bad year? How does that impact the renewal? My question ultimately would be, once we enter into any of these agreements, anytime you group together, can they even split those? So that there's a percentage weight given to how good our year is versus the rest of the group.
Absolutely. So
Right.
and again, dependent on the consortium. But yeah, you might be individually rated, you might be group rated, you might be group rated but tiered. So there's sort of some of it is truly purchasing power, and then you are just purely, individually rated, and maybe you have a stop loss. The stop loss is more spread, but your actual claims are you're incurring your own. But it's variable, but that's definitely one of the key things that we need to find out to understand and vet across.
And I remembered us talking about it in the small groups and stuff like that. And so I just wanted to make sure, even for other board members, just to make sure that we knew that there's so many combinations here that could be a part of this that we'll really need to be mindful of.
Yeah, consortiums can be so varied that we're acting like, or we term it as one solution, but there can be, really it can feel like multiple, different solutions.
And the previous consortium I was in had 50 districts in it, so it was a larger one, and they had 5 different levels every year, and it was based on your percent of claim loss ratio. And so you would have some districts get a 6% cut, reduction in rates for the next year, where some would have a 12% increase, and everything in between, depending on where you were within the consortium. So the consortium would get a purchasing price, and then they would divvy out the benefits or not benefits based on how your particular 36 months claim history would be.
Board Member Allen?
Thank you, sir. I want to stay on this consortium issue. Obviously, the list that we have with the 20 districts or however many there are, okay, it's all education, it's all in this area generally, and yet you've referenced like state of Missouri. How far can these consortiums reach, and do they need to be similar in their purpose, meaning education or nonprofit? I mean, if we're 5,000, there are not going to be a lot of 5,000 options out there, I would suspect. So how far can we take this as into contiguous, non-contiguous states, that kind of thing?
So typically, they are state kind of based, just because insurance is regulated at a state level. When you start to cross states, there's complexities. I'm not going to say that that's 100% of the time, but that's what we typically see. That's why you're not seeing a lot of Kansas to Missouri, even though obviously we share a very similar demographic. Also, the reason that they're often industry-based is because when you have similar industries collectively, you are typically getting a very similar demographic, which is appealing or appetizing to not bring in a group of metal workers that are, all male and have there be such a vast difference in what your general demographics are. So that's why you do see often there being an alignment. But there are variable, again, various offerings. School districts in the state of Missouri have been prolific in the development of consortiums. Different states have different kind of views of this. There are some states that have more kind of a governmental approach, where you'll see cities, counties, schools, et cetera, join together. The state of Missouri just happens to be more focused in that school district space. And again, when you talk about risk, which, then having common populations, it just makes more sense to be similar to in terms of sharing risk. Otherwise, one group is taking on, a population who's likely to be more childbearing and have more, maternity claims, which are fairly expensive, and another group, less of that. There's just not as much willingness to take on that.
I think what I would add, I think there are more consortiums on the St. Louis side of the state than we have on this side of the state. That's my opinion on the education I've gone through.
Does the region matter? I mean, can we look at a St. Louis for that matter, or what have you? And since I do appreciate the fact you said something about females, since you already bashed on men, I get it. I just thought I'd throw that out there for some lighthearted moment. But then also, in addition to the question of region, is pharmacy covered on the sheet? And I'm just missing it. I know pharmacy was part of kind of hybrid and the other. Where does that land on consortium issues?
Well, it would have a similar coverage. If a consortium, most likely, they're usually kind of a self-funded model. So there would be pharmacy coverage. That would obviously be something we would be looking for. So it would either be in that bundle or carved out to a pharmacy benefit manager. In cases like that, employees would have an insurance card for their medical, and then they would have a pharmacy card if it's carved out. But that
Right.
would be
And
included.
so the east side of the state, that is a possibility. We could,
There is, when we looked into consortiums 3 years ago, what we found was some of those consortiums, you have to really look at the network. If we go with a consortium from the St. Louis side, does their network include providers on this side of the state that our employees are utilizing? So that's a big consideration,
sure.
and would be a question we would include in the RFP.
all right, thanks.
On that same line, are there other large districts within our area that are going to be going out for RFPs this year that we're going to be talking to, and/or that we even would want to approach to even try to continue to build essentially a coalition, is, for lack of a better term? Do we know, I guess would be, the first question, so.
Yeah, I don't think we really would know what districts are going out for an RFP without doing some surveying on that.
Is there any benefit to us trying to do that? Because, I guess, and again, I fully understand I could be getting too far ahead. So you can tell me to stop if you want, but we look at 4,000 people or 4,000 lives that we're covering here. If you get a couple of other large districts to all of a sudden jump in and equalize the risk, it becomes a much more attractive proposal for all of us within the region. So I'm just curious, because I guarantee we're not the only district that is wrestling with this problem. So,
That's something we would be happy to reach out and do some communicating, get more information.
okay, thanks. Board Member Allen?
So, yes, I did actually push that again, even though I just spoke, but I thank you for asking that question because, okay, so let's look at this marketing piece, right? Who's on this in the very top? CBIZ, Lee Summit. So if it's a partnership, we need to dig, right? Because you're the consultant we come to dig for that kind of a question. And if it's, hey, KCMO's going out, whoever's going out, getting ahead of that curve, right? Anticipating where the puck's going to be, that's why you score, i.e., that'd be great to know. So reconnaissance would be fantastic.
The other question, and I asked it when we even were in some of these meetings, but just for the benefit of everybody, and perhaps it's changed, how do all of our RFPs wrestle with legislation changes as they come in, especially most likely from either a I suppose it could happen from a state level. It certainly looks like it's more practical that it would be coming from a federal level. How does our RFPs / our insurance plans react to those kinds of changes?
So a couple of ways. We certainly, there's compliance questions to understand how carriers can manage and deal with compliance. And then in our role, we also make sure that we have a compliance officer that stays abreast of all requirements and communicates those to our account teams, myself, my partners, and we are bringing that to you guys as well as to our carrier partners.
And I have a very specific, just healthcare question. I'm sorry. How does lasering, since that particular practice, I would like to pull my hair out at, just so everybody knows, for those of us who have dealt with situations like that, how does that fit into the current legislation and how is that still legal? I feel like it's a very gray area in how that is being applied to how they laser clients under maximum protections that people have and stuff like that. So just curious. Random question.
It is certainly a very frustrating situation, and I would say that, we talked about it in the context of, would the person being lasered know that they were lasered? And the answer is no. That's just, and they're not talked about as an individual, though their condition may be known. They're not, it's not, let's talk about the case of Aaron Eason as an insurance committee. It is still, privacy continues to be maintained. It's just the ability to continue to reinsure at that level. And, and often what can happen is that a stop-loss carrier could come back and say, here's our bid, our renewal for you. And then you say, well, I can't take on a 42% increase. And they say, okay, well, we can bring it down to 16% if we laser. So it's not that you necessarily can't get to the point where they'll insure you without lasering, but can an organization take on that risk? Or that it's actually, you're eliminating the risk and just ensuring that because lasering happens on individuals who have conditions that are guaranteed to continue to cost at a level that is not consumable, meaning you're not going to get enough fluctuation in the rest of your membership to allow for that to be consumed without a guaranteed financial hit. So it's handled the way it's handled. Why it's still legal, I think it's so that people can continue to offer stop loss, because otherwise I think we would get into a mix where there's no meaning behind stop loss. You're just paying a premium to have
Right.
somebody tell you you still have to pay this amount.
It's just a soapbox item. I'm sorry.
I think that we all.
Right. Board Member Hedrick.
Yes, I just have a comment and a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. My comment was in terms of trying to find other districts going out for bid. I think the two things that are the biggest drivers in that is the fact that how many tiers we have and what our plan designs are. That is going to affect, what the rates are, of course, but also other districts' willingnesses to have us bid with them. So that would be my comment there. And then my question would probably be for Sarah, and I just want to make sure I understood a comment that was in the first part of the conversation about that you had surveyed 7 districts who were in consortium. Did I understand that there was only 3 that responded to the survey? And if that's accurate, were they all represented in the same consortium, the ones that responded?
Okay, great question. So just to clarify that, we sent, or CBIZ did on behalf of the district with the questions that the team developed. They sent the questions to 7 consortiums across the state of Missouri, and only 3 responded. The consortium that Blue Springs is in, our local consortium, the Missouri Educators Unified Health Plan, and Missouri Educators Trust. And as Aaron mentioned earlier, and Board Member Fritchie was part of this RFP process 3 years ago, Missouri Educators Trust, I spent a lot of time completing an application prior to our RFP. We sent them all of our claim information, and they were the consortium that responded back and said, we don't want Lee Summit to be part of our consortium. Your claims are too high. The other school districts within that consortium wouldn't like that. So within these 3, the local one, as I said, has about 5,000 members. The Missouri Educators Unified Health Plan has 7,700 members. And then the Missouri Educators Trust has over 14,000 lives. And then we can
I was part of that team as well, and know how much work we went to evaluate all those different consortiums. So I appreciate that information. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Board Member Fritchie.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, given that we have had a better year this year as far as claims are concerned, what position does that put us in as we go out for bid?
So in a normal year, I would say to you that puts us in a better position. If we had had a similar claims year to what we had in 2019, I would suggest we would have a very similar response to consortiums and frankly, in general, in this process that we had 3 years ago. However, what is very challenging is to determine the causation on why our plan year was positive. So we know that healthcare utilization was suppressed. We know that some of those conditions that were not treated are likely to require treatment, perhaps higher level of acuity treatment than what would have been provided had it happened real time. We also know that there are conditions that came and went and didn't require a substantial amount of treatment. What's challenging is how to attribute that in what is just, insurance companies have put out, we're projecting a 5 to 6% COVID kind of increase. Some of my clients have seen it in excess of that, and some have not. And I've got clients who have had, and I'm talking about, metro area clients who have had substantial claims associated to COVID because they've had randomly people who have required ICU hospitalizations, multiple people. And so it's just how are carriers, how are potential respondents going to interpret a positive 2020 is at this point a little bit unknowable. For all of our clients who are going out to RFP, we're all in the same time frame. So unfortunately, I don't have anyone to learn from. And unfortunately, I don't have any precedent to reference and say this is how they usually treat a pandemic year. I hope I never have to say that again. But that's the challenge of the situation is how are we going to rebound? I'll tell you, right now our claims are running nicely. But we're at the beginning of the year when everyone who has an HSA is currently paying out of pocket, and so they always run pretty well in January. So it's how do we trend? And we're just unfortunately kind of in this pacing and timeline where we're kind of right aligned with the information's going to come out after, and we're going to learn from it kind of as we go along. I'm sorry, I don't have a more concrete answer, but that's the uniqueness of this particular year. And one of the reasons that I think the risk, the team talked about in terms of the risk is with the unknowability of what our claims are doing, that is just, that just provides a larger amount of risk than perhaps where we would have been, even if we had had a negative plan year or a positive plan year and known why that occurred.
Thank you. That's understandable. Thanks very much.
If we don't have other questions from board members, essentially what we need to do is just make a decision, or essentially is it kind of the will of the board to pursue those two options, the consortium option and the hybrid option. And if it is, then we can direct staff to go ahead and start that RFP preparation based on those two outcomes. Does anybody have an objection to that, to them getting started that way? And does anybody have any further comments or questions that they would like about this particular topic? Board Member Campbell?
I'd just like to say thank you. I know the committee definitely worked hard, but you all worked hard as well to really prepare this information. I especially appreciate the risk matrix that you put together because that lays it out really well for us to clearly understand where the risks are for us as a district. So thank you.
Okay, well, I think that gives the go-ahead. So to pursue those two options, we really appreciate you being here, and that was very nice of you to come tonight. So thank you very much. Sarah, thank you. Dr. Miller, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
We have one other item that we just need to do here in the work session here, which is just to do our motion to go into closed session. So I would take that motion now.
I'll do it. I move to conduct a closed session, including any record or vote immediately following the regular session on Thursday, March 4th, 2021 at 301 Northeast Tudor Road, Lee Summit, Missouri, 64086, for consideration of the following matters. And Section 610.021, Revised Statute, State of Missouri, Legal Issues, subsection 1, and Real Estate, subsection 2.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to move into closed session. Any discussion on this? Ms. Ismer, can we please have a roll call vote?
Board Member Doan,
Aye.
Vice President Fritchie, Board Member Campbell, Board Member Allen, Board Member Marshall,
Aye.
Board Member Hedrick,
Abstain.
President Murdoch.
Aye. Motion carries 6-0 with one abstention, and we are in closed session. Thank you, everyone.